Okay, welcome to chapter 32 in the I don't know, philosophy book as I call it. Okay, so this is on change management, page 567. So system administrators make changes all the time. Sometimes they're very small changes, adding a user, changing a group. And typically that only affects one or two people. But on the other hand, system administrators also make changes that have huge impact to other people. So you kind of have to be aware of just how volatile your system is and how much change you can actually tolerate. So in the introduction, they talk about the use of a change review board, a CRB. And so this is basically a body, usually, half a dozen people in it, that review all the changes that are about to happen and bless them and saying, okay, we've thought about everything, and sure, you can go ahead and, change that version of SQL Server, that kind of thing. So it's a formal change management process, and it includes an awful lot of communication. In other words, included in this is telling people, okay, now the SQL Server is going to be down because we're, next Tuesday, because we're going to do an upgrade. So make sure you do this, this, and this, So communication is kind of an integral part of the change management process. And clearly, you kind of sort of need a tracking system. You probably need something that says, here's where we are, and here's where we're going, and here's how we're going to get there, a tracking system. They have a really cool story on page 568 about a little shaded area talking about the Olympic Games. And so in 1996 Olympic Games, IBM had put in a system, and at the very last minute, some developer somewhere made a couple of changes, he thought was very minor changes to the system, and the whole system just went down. In other words, the commentators typically would look up, the name of the athlete and get some nice bio and statistics, this person did this, and, but all that was down. And so they had an awful lot of dead air, and quite frankly, the commentators used it to kind of, dish dirt at IBM, saying, wow, if our system was running, we could tell you what's going on, but we can't, that kind of stuff. And so it was very embarrassing, all because they kind of had a cavalier attitude about making changes. No one went in and said, okay, now we're getting ready to make this change. Is it going to affect anything? Perhaps we ought to test it first. Nope. The day before the thing went live, somebody went there and made some change. Okay. So, yeah, that was bad. 2 years later, they kind of did it again, and they thankfully got their feces co-located. Okay. So change review board on page 568. So what are the responsibilities of a change review board? Well, defining the process, that would be handy. You need to have, okay, here's how you do this. You submit this form for this to do, that kind of stuff. Establish the definitions and standards. Here's how you do this. Reviewing requests, where you're going to either accept or reject them. And there could be more too. There could be a non-technical review, like, hey, did you fill out all the forms? Did you miss any boxes on the form? That kind of stuff. And then coordinating the change activities and post-change activities. Like, okay, it worked, now we need to document it, that kind of stuff. So the purpose. What's the purpose of a change control board? Well, the purpose is to make sure that all changes are successful for everyone, right? Not just the person who wants the change done. It's kind of sort of like project management, where you say, okay, now here's what it's going to take, here's how long it's going to take, here's how many resources we need, here's how we're going to know when we're done. Because, by the way, if you don't know when you're done, how do you know when to stop, right? Okay, just saying. And it's really intended to minimize business risk with changes. Now, if I'm going to make a change, I want to make sure that I don't blow something up in the meantime. And the last one is, it is a communications tool. It allows you, the system administrator, or whoever you are asking for the change, to communicate with everyone else and tell them what's going on, and then, get their feedback. Because there's going to be somebody who's going to raise their hand and go, but wait a minute, I've got a report due. Can we postpone this a day? And they'll go, oh, okay. That kind of thing. Okay. So changes are evaluated for the effect on not just what you want, but what other people want. Let me tell you a crazy story. Back in the old days, we basically had 3 subnets, so to speak. We built our system where we would have 3 routers, but we didn't have enough money for the routers, so we ended up just having a layer 2 bridge between them. We had the IP addresses for over here, and then IP addresses for this group and IP addresses for that. So we were ready. We just didn't have the money. And so we made it so all you had to do is just swap out the bridges, put routers in, and presto, changeover, you're up and running. Well, one of the people were saying, let's go ahead and get a router because our stuff is getting kind of slow. And they said, oh, okay, well, we're going to fund all 3 of the routers? No, we're just going to do one. And I went, no, wait a minute now. Putting a router in yours is going to help you. But unfortunately, putting a router in yours, so it's going to speed you up, but it's going to slow everyone else down to the way we had the bridge set up. All traffic would have to go to the router and then turn the router and go back to its own segment over a second time, like doubling the amount of traffic for everyone else. And so we said, no. I mean, yes, your proposal will help you and your organization very well. However, it's going to damage everybody else. Let's go ahead and wait until we have the money for all 3 routers, and that way you get what you want and everyone else is not affected. Actually, everyone gets win-win, right? So don't just assume that the person asking is going to be aware that the effects might hurt other people and care. They kind of knew that putting in that one router was going to slow everyone else down. They just didn't care. So change control board would say, whoa. All right, that's what this is about. Okay, there's one other benefit of using a control board that's not in the book, but it's very important. It provides top cover. Let me explain. Let's say you do a change and it comes out horribly. Everything's all messed up, and somebody comes in and says, how come you didn't anticipate this problem? You could say, well, look, 5 other people looked at it and they didn't see a problem either. Besides, they're the ones that approved the change. All I did was implement it. See, that CYA thing is very, very important. Okay, the review process on page 570. So a proposal is submitted. There may be like a non-technical, like a quality review that goes in and said, okay, you're ready. And then you have a meeting with the board and everyone discusses it. Hopefully the people in the board have actually seen the forms and looked at them. It's not like they've never heard this thing before in their entire life. There'll be some discussions and some questions that are going back and forth, and then it gets approved or disapproved. You have a meeting. Okay, what's next on the agenda? Well, Bob's request to upgrade the SQL Server. Okay, well, what do you got? That kind of stuff. So change proposals on page 570. So typically a request form of some type, it doesn't have to be paper. Something that you fill out, the who, what, when, where, and why. Clearly, I need to know what change I'm getting ready to make, what system and services that are being affected. For example, if I'm going to upgrade the SQL Server, then is that going to affect, payroll? Is that going to affect ordering system for customers? So you need to know the systems and services that are being affected. The reason for the change, what are the risks in doing this? What are the test procedures you're going to use? In other words, how do you know that the change was successful? You just say, okay, well, we're done. I guess I'm going to go home. Or do you have to do something else? You need a back out plan. I call it fallback plan. But something that basically says, okay, we are hip deep in this thing and it's clear that something is wrong. We need to get back to the way we were quick. A backup plan, a back out plan. And then the time frames, because it could be you say, okay, we're going to do this in 2 hours, and maybe that's a hard 2 hours where absolutely, positively cannot go any further than that. That's very possible. And then the how long it takes to do the back out. Okay? It's going to take us 30 minutes to do the back. So those are things you would discuss or have ready in some sort of a form. Okay. Now, you could have some classifications. Not every change requires a formal thing. So, a routine change, this is just, there's no outage. We're not expecting an outage. There's practically no risk involved. So, basically, don't worry about it, okay? No need to go to the CRB. You probably want to document that you made the change, but that's about it. You don't expect anything. A major update? Well, yeah. I'm expecting an outage. Like, for example, I'm going to upgrade my SQL Server. And is there some risk? Yeah. And is it going to affect people? Yeah. A sensitive, where it's not really an outage, but there is some risk. And then the other one is an emergency, like, oh my God, something happened and we need to do this now. Like somebody found a new vulnerability and I have to install this patch right now, today. So most people, they'll allow you to do this, and then you send an emergency thing in to the control board saying, I couldn't wait, so let's just go ahead and say, here's what we did, and here's why we did it. Okay? So maybe, in my case, I'd probably call one of the senior people on the board and say, look, I've got a problem. I've got to install this patch now. I just want to let you know, and I'll tell you when it's over with. Okay. Afterwards, you can seek full approval, but you have to move on. Okay, do I need a fallback plan for everything? Probably not. Only those things where I expect there's a risk involved. So let's talk about risk. On page 572, they talk about risk discovery and quantification. So a risk matrix, basically has, this is just arbitrary, a high impact, medium, low, some sort of severity, and then the likelihood. So it's about the severity of the impact and the likelihood of it occurring. Clearly, if you had high impact and high likelihood, then that definitely means we got a problem, right? That's where you're going to do an awful lot of hand-wringing and planning and back-out plans and all the rest of that stuff. Make sense? And so the quality checker, the non-technical, probably could help you with this, saying, wait a minute, how did you come up with the fact that this is a medium severity or that kind of thing, right? Before we get to the board. So the technical planning part on page 573. So obviously there's a process for doing this, right? Okay. You probably need some sort of testing documentation to go with it. Remember the test-driven development thing? Okay. You need a success criteria. You need to be some way saying, okay, I'm getting ready to upgrade to SQL Server, and to me, success means I can run this query or this application and everything works. What is my criteria? What is the fallback plan? The fallback plan probably starts with, okay, we're going to do a backup of the system right here and now before we do anything. And then we're going to install, and if something goes wrong, we're just going to restore from the backup and be done. And then the decision point. This is the point where you say, okay, it's taking a lot longer than we thought, or there's a disaster, it's not working, and we need to go back. So let me just give you, if your scheduled outage was 2 hours long, that's your maintenance window, okay? And the backup plan, it takes 30 minutes to do. That means your decision point is 1.5 hours in. That's when you have to go look at the watch and go, well, can we finish in the next 30 minutes or not? That's when you need to call it. Okay. So next thing we're going to talk about on page 574 is the scheduling. So wouldn't it be nice to not do this in the middle of the workday? How about 2 o'clock in the morning? That would be, something off peak. So if there were outages, it'd be affecting very few people. Now there's a problem with that. What if you're a global company and you work 24/7 and you have, stores all over the world? There's probably not a single time that's not peak. So, are you going to be happy getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to come do this thing? Okay. And by the way, do sleepy employees work really well? Okay, just saying. So one way of doing it is to have a regularly scheduled maintenance window. Let's just say, for example, Monday afternoon between 5 and 6 is our regularly scheduled maintenance window. Everything we do, we're going to try to put into that window, okay? Do not schedule them like on a Friday, because that way you're not available on Saturday and Sunday. And so if something goes wrong, I need to be able to call you back in. So don't do it. Do it on Monday or Tuesday or something like that. Not on a Friday. Don't have your regularly scheduled maintenance window before a weekend or a holiday. Okay, good. They start talking about the Bell Labs demo, the shaded area on page 575. What happens if you have a really important demo coming up? You're trying to show off, to some prospective buyer or some bigwig or some congressman or something. You probably do not want to have a maintenance window right before that, right? So some special event, something, you probably need to kind of freeze things. Communications on page 576. Hang on, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works.